1 year on, and the war in Gaza shows no sign of abating. Instead, conflict is spreading across the region, and diplomacy has all but failed. So what's the likely result of the ongoing tension? Could the Middle East be heading into a new era? This is Inside Story. Welcome to the program. I'm Cyril Vanier. Israel's war on Gaza has well and truly spilled over into the region. For the first time since 2006, there are Israeli boots on Lebanese soil, and Israeli warplanes are destroying parts of the country's south and east, as well as the capital, Beirut. Hezbollah is firing barrages of rockets into Israel almost daily. Yemen's Houthis are targeting ships in the Red Sea, and earlier this week launched missiles into central Israel. And Iran-linked armed groups in Iraq have targeted Israel. All the while, the prospect of all-out war with nuclear power Iran looms large. A range of diplomatic efforts has proved unsuccessful. Peace has never seemed so far away. What leverage do countries such as the US, Egypt, and Qatar still have? Can Israel destroy Hamas and Hezbollah? And would that end the war on Gaza? And if so, what's next? We'll hear from our guests in a moment. First, though, this report from Alex Beard.
The new daily reality for the Lebanese capital. Israeli warplanes leaving southern Beirut in flames. And as residential buildings burn, Israeli troops push further into southern Lebanon. Hezbollah fighters have been engaging them on the ground, and the group is still launching missiles across the border. The Israeli Prime Minister maintains he is winning, and that a new Middle East is on the horizon.
We're changing the strategic reality of the Middle East. Changing the balance of power brings with it the possibility of creating new alliances in our region. Because of a simple reason. Because we are winning. Our enemies and our friends return to see Israel as it really is. A strong country, a determined country, a powerful country.
And in Gaza, 1 year of bombardment has left the Strip unrecognizable. The death toll has now passed 42,000. And the Palestinians who have survived face starvation and repeated forced displacement. Despite laying waste to Gaza, Israel has yet to fulfill its stated war goals of destroying Hamas and bringing home the captives. And as the conflict spreads across the region, hopes for a ceasefire are fading.
The only and the real danger in the region is the policies of this government of Israel, are the actions of this government of Israel, and the failure of the international community to stop it and say enough.
Meanwhile, Israeli assassinations and strikes on Iranian interests have brought the longtime enemies closer to all-out conflict. Tehran's missile attack on Israel last week remains unanswered, despite Netanyahu's promise of retaliation. And as battles play out on several fronts, diplomatic activity has been at fever pitch, but with few, if any, results. Israel's friends and allies in the West are becoming increasingly frustrated with its war on Gaza. France is one of the latest to call for a halt to all weapons exported to Israel for use in the Strip. The United States has maintained what it calls ironclad support for Israel. But media reports say in private, President Joe Biden has labelled Netanyahu a bad guy. And with less than a month to go before the presidential election, it's unclear if Washington's position will change or what Israel plans to do next. Alex Beard, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
So let's bring in our guests. Here in Doha, we are joined by Bassam Haddad, founding director of the Middle East and Islamic Studies program at George Mason University and editor of Jadaliyya online magazine. In Ramallah, in the occupied West Bank, is Raja Khalidi, the director general of the Palestine Economic Policy Research Institute. And in London is Hugh Lovatt, a senior policy fellow at the European Council on Foreign Relations. Welcome to Inside Story to all of you. Bassam, we'll start with you. There's a lot of talk of reshaping the Middle East at the moment, primarily from the Israeli Prime Minister. We just heard him in that report, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He is a known quantity. He's been in power 16 years, cumulatively speaking, since the mid-90s. Is there anything in his track record that suggests he is capable of reshaping the Middle East in any meaningful way?
I don't think this is a solid prospect at all. We all know that Israel today is on a high after the supposed decapitation of Hezbollah on multiple fronts. The kind of situation we're in today gives not just Israel this emboldened posture, but also gives the United States an emboldened posture, which has indeed allowed Israel, or is allowing Israel explicitly, a carte blanche in Lebanon. It is also allowing Israel a kind of measured but forceful and powerful response to Iran's response to what Israel did prior. And I know that, we are in a very difficult situation, but it could get far, far worse. Wars on a large scale beyond what we are seeing do not start quickly, but when they do, the unknowns grow exponentially. And there is a host of factors that I'm hoping we can get into that will play a role in turning what is happening into not just a broad regional war, but also can get to the international level.
Hugh, when Benjamin Netanyahu lays out his vision for a new Middle East, he's not particularly detailed. What, for the benefit of our viewers, right, at the outset of this conversation, what do we think he has in mind?
What Netanyahu has in mind, first and foremost, is what he's had in mind for the last year. That is his own political survival, and that is what will continue to, in my view, largely dictate Israeli actions going forward. Now, when it comes to the region, we can, I think, get a hint of what Netanyahu may be thinking from the speech he gave recently to the UN General Assembly. There, with, again, his traditional props of a map of the Middle East, he made an argument for how Israel and how the world should create a new Middle Eastern order. And this Middle Eastern order starts perhaps with the Palestinians. We all know the Israeli vision of, or the vision that Israel has of a greater Israel that it wants to cement. It then continues to Lebanon with this idea of being able to defeat Hezbollah and potentially create a new Lebanon free from it, as Israel sees it. But then it extends to the rest of the Middle East with this idea that Israel, with US support and the support of others, could start to roll back Iranian influence. And then finally, it ends in Iran, in Tehran, severely weakening Iran, potentially going after its nuclear program, and potentially also trying to somehow instigate a regime change.
Okay, since you said he starts with the Palestinians, let me take it to Raja Khalidi, joining us from Ramallah. In some of the notes that you shared with us ahead of the show, you have mapped out, it was really interesting to read actually, you've kind of mapped out 4 plausible scenarios for where things could go from here for the Palestinians. Do you want to share that with our viewers, what you see as the kind of the 4 paths?
Yeah, those are 4 scenarios which we've used to frame some work we're doing now, which is a political economy analysis of Palestinian independence and development, we call it. And the idea here is a report that will look at more at the last year than the last 30 years, but in the context of the last 30 years, and try and figure out what we might be facing in the coming 2 years. And that required us to try and look at the politics, of course. And that, in fact, took us to factors both what Israel, is intending, and we've heard, I think, very correctly that, what Israel intends has been declaring it's wanted to do, it's been doing, and much, much more. So we have to assume, to a certain extent, a potentially hostile Israeli adversary. And in this case, we have 2 of these scenarios are perhaps catastrophic or close to, possibly emerging from, but little less than that. And 2 of them are a bit more hopeful and assume a pathway or at least a promise of a 2-state solution. Now, the 2 we call the sudden shock scenario, which is one of increasing volatility and a no-state solution, and a second one, which is protracted regression, which is basically an apartheid, non-partition reality. And each of these, of course, has different features. And, we have a collapsed PA, we have Palestinian political disunity, the rise or the continued control of the national religious bloc in Israel, Gazification the West Bank, and now we have what we're seeing on the ground in the last few days in North Gaza. It makes this scenario regrettably and this is one that could still lead to the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people in Palestine. The other scenarios are perhaps less dire, but none of them really indicate, or we don't see the prospects that there's going to be the sort of political framing for any Palestinian economic, social recovery in the near future, for sure.
Okay, so that's really interesting, because your work as an economist, I'd just remind to our viewers, and we will get to the economic aspect of this later in the discussion, but that's what your work centers on. But you have to make these sort of working assumptions of where Palestinian territories could be headed from now. And scenarios 1 and 2, as you said, increasing volatility, no Palestinian state, and an apartheid reality in an even possibly worsening scenario. And those, you've just said, are more likely. Bassam, when the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, addresses the United Nations General Assembly, as he did a couple weeks ago, he really focuses more on the wider region. Hezbollah, he obviously peppers his speech with the words terrorist and terrorism, children of light versus children of darkness, and he shows us the map, and it starts with Iran, and the entire region is dark, right? He likes to focus on Iran. He likes to focus on Iran-allied groups, and he likes to set the Palestinian issue aside. He mentioned it very little, actually, in his speech. Is there, in your view, a connection between how Israel handles the Palestinian issue and then Israel's place in the wider region? Yes or no?
I mean, Israel is trying to play right now a different kind of game. It is also at the same time continuing with its heinous crimes in Gaza. Today, we saw the killing of the massacring of 60 people in Gaza, mostly in Jabalia in the north. We see incursions into southern Lebanon that are not always working very well, and the pounding of Lebanon and an impending strike against Iran. There's nothing new about what Israel is doing. Its expansionist posture is consistent with its decades of military occupation and settler colonial existence in the region. But today there is another factor, and that factor actually was caused by the emboldenment that Israel gained after the assassination of Nasrallah and the decapitation of a good number of Hezbollah commanders. Now it is willing to take more risks, as well as the US is also willing to support it in taking more risks. And now it's looking for something that is far more than the limited goals that it had in Lebanon and beyond. It actually wants to potentially, as we heard from Netanyahu, advising the Lebanese to actually kill each other, or Israel will kill everyone. The risk that it wants to take right now is similar to what it thinks was 1982 in pushing out the PLO from Lebanon. And this is something that I'm happy to get into, but this is definitely not a goal that it can actually achieve. Hezbollah is a Lebanese party grounded in the largest because Lebanese community.
Everything you're saying is very relevant to the next part of our discussion, but I would like to get an answer on this. Israel acts like it can basically ignore the Palestinian issue and deal with the rest of the region as if they were two separate things. My question to you, we heard so many Western leaders who said to Israel at the same United Nations General Assembly, who said, no, you need to fix the Palestinian issue. There needs to be a state. There needs to be Palestinian self-determination. You won't get security until there is peace. And my question to you is, what do you make of this nexus between the Palestinian cause and Israel's, let's call them, troubles across the region?
I mean, they are organic, they're connected. Israel's trying to decouple them. And this decoupling is now based on this idea that Hezbollah is willing to actually do what it didn't before, which is accept the separation or decoupling, and of course, Iran as well. But I do not think that these plans or these decoupling plans are likely to succeed beyond the very, very short term. The United States and Israel have a short window of opportunity, which is a few weeks before the American elections, where this decoupling might potentially work, but this is certainly not something that is permanent. And as we will see, the unexpected or unintended consequences, for instance, of an Israeli hit against Iran might actually reorder the entire house of cards.
Hugh, you co-wrote an article called Israel's Unwinnable Wars, the Path to De-Escalation in the Middle East. I think this is a major question. Benjamin Netanyahu is still promising total victory to Israelis. You're saying these wars are not winnable. Explain.
Israel's war in Gaza, let's take that first of all, is not winnable through a military strategy. Certainly, Israel has been able to inflict damage to Hamas, killing a number of its senior leadership, including many members of its political leadership in Gaza, killing thousands likely of its fighters, and demolishing Hamas's tunnel infrastructure. But what Israel has not been able to do is fully defeat Hamas, nor free all remaining Israeli hostages. So it is clear in Gaza that there will need to be a political track at some point. And you can make much the same argument when it comes to Lebanon. Again, Israel has inflicted tremendous damage to Hezbollah, but it will not be able to accomplish even its most limited objectives when it comes to trying to return Israelis displaced from the north of Israel by Hezbollah rocket fire, let alone defeat Hezbollah. And this, again, argument can apply across the board anywhere where Israel is active, including Iran. So
what can they achieve militarily?
Political process going forward.
When Netanyahu's security chiefs, huddle with him and they say, "Boss, these are options on the table. This is what you can actually do according to our intelligence assessments." What do you think that looks like? What options is he given where he thinks this can be done?
Well, I think this is the problem. Seen from Israel's perspective now, it only has one option to address its security concerns, and that is military action. The reason it only has a military course of action is because this Israeli government and the governments that have come before it have consistently ignored or rejected diplomatic pathways to resolve these very issues. Israel has rejected Palestinian self-determination. Prime Minister Netanyahu has undermined ceasefire talks. The Israeli government has also rejected a ceasefire with Hezbollah that appears to have been on the table prior to Hassan Nasrallah's assassination, etc., etc., etc. So I think this is the fundamental issue that we all need to address.
Raja, since we're talking about reshaping the region, you're an economist, so you're trying to put numbers, right, on certainly one part of the region, which is the Palestinian territories, and that's what your work has been focused on. We're talking about what the future might hold for reshaping the region. You're trying to put numbers on what the last year has done, how the last year has reshaped Palestinian territories, certainly the Palestinian economy. What have been your main findings?
Well, just before that, I want to add to this discussion about the regional and the national, because I think that everything we've been talking about in terms of Netanyahu's strategy to disconnect, deunify, so to speak, the fronts, the three, Iran, Israel, Palestine, etc., Lebanon fronts, is surely what he's trying to do, and we've seen that in various forms. But I think what really counts is that, as Bassam said, they are organically linked, and hence. What happens in Palestine is really what's going to determine what happens, both in terms of Israel's response and how Iran deals with it, but more importantly, how far it goes in Lebanon. So it's clearly now we have the North Gaza issue to think about. It's not an issue anymore. It's now, I think, and here is where I would say that if you ask about military options that have been put on the table for Gaza, the military options that they appear to be now following are those put by Giora Island, and which are basically to exterminate the north of Gaza's civilian population, or at least expel it and exterminate anybody who does not leave, and rule it under military rule and take over humanitarian assistance and all of that. Now, that is not a military operation. That's a genocidal military operation. And if we don't, keep our eyes really focused on that, and I think that's therefore, and I think Hezbollah is keeping its eyes focused on that. That's why there's not going to be a be connection as long as Israel is pursuing a genocidal war in Gaza. As far as the last year is concerned, I was talking to a colleague in the UN who are trying to do their modeling of the cost. And basically, you can only talk about in terms of years, 30 years of development lost. Take the 18 billion that the World Bank estimated in terms of damage and reconstruction requirements, which was after 4 months of war, and multiply it by 3. So it's we're in that sort of territory. 1.5 million people. How do you provide decent temporary shelter for them? The relief requirements have yet to be dealt with. The Israelis have calculated that if they're going to take over Gaza's humanitarian effort, it's like $5 billion, which is really what, in fact, this has cost so far to the international community in terms of just providing basic food, etc. The little that gets in, of course, to Gaza. So, the numbers, we can talk about the numbers as much as, but I don't think it's now, you don't really know the numbers, one. And secondly, the numbers are not what count now. The question is how to prevent the numbers in the end from being uncountable, which is where we're moving, where we're going. And you've read about the estimates of actual fatalities that will result from the war, 184,000 by the time all of the effects in the next few years have played out.
Bassam, a few minutes ago, you were making a point on Hezbollah. I interrupted you because I just wanted to wrap up the Palestinian part of the discussion. I think we've done a good job of that, and everybody seems to agree there is a nexus, there is a connection, a very strong one, between how Israel deals with Palestine and how Israel then handles the rest of the region, or handles itself within the rest of the region. What did you want to say about Hezbollah?
Well, on the one hand, the decapitation theory is not extremely far off. In other words, Hezbollah has actually been weakened. But based on the actual developments on the ground, if you look at the failed incursions into, or aggression or attacks into Lebanon from the southern border or southeastern border, they have not actually been as successful as Israel claims, as we have seen in various reports. The pummeling of Beirut, unfortunately, is met with helplessness because there's no way to stop what they are doing. But that actually doesn't constitute military progress. We have seen a very steady and measured response from Israeli or from Hezbollah rockets over the past several days, similar to what we have seen before. That measured nature of response that can be quantified on the daily in terms of targets, except for the past few days, it's been actually hitting more hurtful targets and has actually claimed civilian deaths, including just right now, I'm watching the screens. So we are not sure the extent to which Hezbollah has been weakened. In all cases, this idea that Israel is going to launch an invasion that will resemble the 1982 invasion in which it ousted the PLO is theater, because the PLO is one thing and Hezbollah is another. Hezbollah is an organic, basically is a party, Lebanese party, is an organic part of the social fabric of Lebanon. It is based in the largest community, Lebanese community inside Lebanon. Its capabilities are far, far superior to those of the PLO in absolute or relative terms to those of Israel, comparing 82
Bassam, pause for a second. I want to make sure our viewers understand the message here. Israel went into southern Lebanon in the early 80s to get rid of a Palestinian armed group, and what they ended up with is a Lebanese armed group referred to today as possibly the largest non-state armed actor in the world, and they are fighting it 40 years on. Do we agree?
Yes, yes, and this is the force, this is the party, this is the community that Israel wants to completely obliterate or weaken so much that it no longer poses a threat, which is incredibly a fantastic goal. It is not likely to take place in any way, shape, or form unless you actually literally erode and annihilate the entire or half of the Lebanese population. But more importantly is this geostrategic level that is involved today in any attempt at actually carrying out this objective. The spiraling out of control of this sort of attack pending also, of course, the attack on Iran, which is likely to happen in the next hours or the next days, might actually bring in other factors that we have not considered since the beginning of the genocide in Gaza, which is basically the entry in one form or another of Russia and China. And we are also looking at a US that is, for the first time during the past year, is actually concerned about the US or about Israel's retaliation to the retaliation vis-a-vis Iran. As we have heard from Biden and others, they are concerned that Israel should not hit the oil fields or the nuclear facilities, because these would actually send oil prices skyrocketing, not least because Iran has promised to respond by hitting US interests and the interests of US allies in the region, which might turn this into much broader of a conflict than just a regional conflict. So while the hubris and the sort of the high and elation of Israel right now is evident, I think lots of the plans and the designs that we saw Netanyahu hold actually in a map are more aspirational than actually realistic.
Okay, real quick, because we have under 3 minutes left. Hugh, if the conflicts, plural, continue on their current path, current trend, what do you project?
The current trend is clear, and it is a trend towards regional war. Arguably, we're almost there, already there, I should say. Certainly, if Israel does attack Iran, as we all expect, and there is a significant Israeli attack against Iran, as we all expect, Iran would retaliate, and Israel will retaliate to that retaliation. And so we will end up in this very dangerous cycle of expanding and exponential regional violence. Last word, though, it's still not too late for diplomacy to work, but that will require a decisive change by the US and European governments to actually exert real pressure, real leverage against Israel to stop Israel from escalating this further.
Raja, I'll give you the last word. We have, just letting you know, we have less than a minute to go, but you're the epicenter of all of this in occupied Palestinian territories. How does it feel to you when you try to look ahead, from where you're sitting?
Well, look, the impunity that Israel and Netanyahu has now come to get, expect and enjoy from the international community with regard to Gaza and the West Bank, whereas there appear to be certain constraints on him when it comes to regional, turning it into a regional war or even a world war. I think that's what worries me, to be honest, because it means that he could well settle with some sort of a calming, let's say, of the fronts other than West Bank and Gaza, and force Lebanon and Hezbollah to accept that in somehow or another through military action, while continuing basically to implement the plans they have for Gaza, as well as what they can get away with in the West Bank in terms of refugee camps, villages, etc., that might be now subject to greater pressure than even we've seen in the last year. So that's what we're thinking about.
All right, gentlemen, that's the time we have for today. Thanks to all our guests, Bassam, Haddad, Raja, Khalidi, and Hugh Lovatt. And thank you, too, for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, that's aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X. Our handle there is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Cyril Vanier, and the whole team here in Doha, bye for now.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.